There are seasons in Formula One that seem to be shaped not only by engineering, strategy, or statistics, but by an almost intangible force that surrounds a driver and pushes him toward destiny. And in the case of Max Verstappen, the possibility of becoming champion once again feels less like a distant scenario and more like an inevitability slowly taking form. It begins in the garages, where the smell of fuel mixes with tension, and travels through the paddock corridors, where whispers about Red Bull's resurgence grow louder with every session. Week after week, Verstappen makes it clear that he is not merely competing. He is imposing his rhythm on a championship that appears to bend to his will. From the early rounds of the season, his approach carried the weight of someone who knows exactly what it takes to break the resistance of an entire grid. The sharp radio messages, the unwavering confidence in braking zones, the precision with which he positions the car at every apex. Everything pointed to a driver who, even when the machinery around him faltered, found a way to force performance out of thin air. And that is what separates champions from contenders. The ability not only to win when everything goes right, but to survive when everything goes wrong. As the year progressed, Red Bull brought updates that seemed modest on paper, but transformative on the track. Small improvements in energy deployment, aerodynamic tweaks around the rear end, and subtle refinements in the suspension geometry suddenly restored the car's balance. Verstappen felt it, the engineers felt it, and the rest of the grid sensed it as well, with increasing unease. Because it is not just about speed, it's about the psychological impact of seeing the one driver you hoped would be vulnerable re-emerging with renewed strength. Every session began to follow a familiar pattern. Verstappen taking a few laps to build rhythm, analyzing the behavior of the car, identifying the limits, and then, almost casually, pushing beyond them. Even on weekends where rivals seemed stronger on Friday, by Saturday afternoon he had transformed the competitive landscape with a qualifying lap that bordered on violent perfection. The kind of lap that makes engineers exhale in disbelief and forces rival strategists to rethink everything they thought they knew. As the championship tightened, the narrative shifted. It stopped being about whether Verstappen could catch the leaders and became about how long it would take. Races that once looked like opportunities for rivals turned into stages for him to dismantle hope piece by piece. Tire wear? He managed it with a surgeon's precision. Fuel saving? He adapted with the ease of a veteran who understands that championships are often won in the moments no camera shows. Even under pressure, in wheel-to-wheel combat, Verstappen demonstrated a clarity that bordered on frightening. He attacked without hesitation, calculating gaps that seemed impossible to others, diving into corners where most drivers wouldn't even dare to imagine a move. Meanwhile, inside Red Bull, the atmosphere transformed. What had started as a season filled with doubts, questions about internal disputes, uncertainties about long-term stability, concerns about how the car compared to its rivals, slowly turned into a collective belief that the championship was slipping into their hands once again. Strategists worked with an almost ritualistic precision, mechanics executed pit stops with renewed confidence, and the entire operation aligned itself around the man who had already rewritten their history. But what made Verstappen's campaign truly commanding was not only his pace, it was the inevitability he projected. Even on weekends where the car wasn't the fastest, the sense lingered that something extraordinary could happen. A daring early pit stop, a masterful stint saving tires until the final laps, a sudden burst of pace after a safety car. He always found the storyline that pulled the race back to him. Rivals, faced with this, felt their strategies collapse under the weight of unpredictability. How do you beat someone who refuses to be beaten? And as the season approached its decisive phase, Verstappen's demeanor became even more telling. He spoke less in press conferences, letting his driving tell the story. The sharp edges of frustration that had shown up earlier in the year were replaced by a calm determination. It was the posture of a man who could feel the championship within reach. His laps became smoother, his decisions more refined, his overtakes more calculated. Watching him drive felt like watching someone negotiating directly with the laws of physics, asking them for a moment of leniency and receiving it. The paddock, always quick to sense shifts in momentum, began to accept the idea that the championship was tilting toward him. Engineers from rival teams observed telemetry comparing their best laps to Verstappen's and left their garage shaking their heads. The commentators whispered that they had seen this movie before. This rising tension, this creeping inevitability, this sense that no matter how hard others pushed, Verstappen would be the one dictating the story. Every victory transformed into a message. every podium into a warning, every comeback drive into a statement of authority. Through it all, Verstappen stood at the center, weathering storms that would have broken other drivers and emerging more focused, more determined, more frighteningly consistent. And as the final races approached, the possibility of him becoming champion again was no longer a dream whispered in Red Bull's motorhome. It was a looming reality stretching across the calendar. Even teams that had fought fiercely against him early in the year began to shift their goals, no longer talking about beating Verstappen for the title, but about salvaging the best position possible behind him. That kind of psychological shift, subtle yet immense, is often what seals a championship long before the final race. But perhaps the most striking element of Verstappen's rise toward another title is the silence it imposes. Not a literal silence, but the silence of inevitability. The moment when fans, commentators, rivals, and even doubters feel the atmosphere change. The point at which the season stops being a battlefield and becomes a coronation march. Max Verstappen, with all the complexity that surrounds him, raw talent, ruthless instinct, relentless competitiveness, has positioned himself once again on the edge of a championship that seems ready to fall into his hands. If the story continues unfolding the way it has, if the car continues giving him the platform to unleash what only he can deliver, then the question may no longer be if he will be champion.